I stood at the edge of my daughter's doorway, trying to warn her before everything collapsed, and the words that came back at me felt sharper than any slap. My daughter's voice shook, not with fear, but with fury. "Get out," my daughter said, gripping the phone in one hand. "If you don't, I'll call the police." In that moment, something inside me went quiet. No shouting, no begging, just clarity. I turned away, walked to my car, and made a call that would quietly unravel everything my daughter believed was safe. Before I tell the full story, take a second to support my channel, follow it, and drop a comment saying where you're watching from. It helps these stories reach people who need them. The day had started like any other ordinary afternoon. The sun was high, the neighborhood calm, the kind of calm that makes trouble feel impossible. I had driven across town with a folder on the passenger seat, thick with documents I never want to collect. Bank notices, credit summaries, statements that should never have existed in the first place. My daughter's husband worked 3 blocks away at a distribution firm, and I found him first. The break room smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the space as I laid the papers out across the scratched laminate table. The son-in-law's face drained of color the moment the numbers became visible. "Where'd you get those?" the son-in-law demanded, voice cracking. "The bank called my house by mistake. Late payment notice. Wrong number attached to the address." I tapped the page slowly. 53,000 in unsecured losses tied to the house. The son-in-law stepped closer, cologne mixing with panic. "This has nothing to do with you." I didn't raise my voice. Years of supervising job sites had taught me something important. Panic feeds on noise. "The house my daughter lives in is being used as collateral," I said. "That makes it my business." The son-in-law laughed, but the sound had no confidence behind it. "That house belongs to my wife. I co-signed the mortgage," I replied, "which means the risk belongs to me." The son-in-law swept the papers onto the floor like the problem would disappear, and the evidence did. "Stay out of my life." I bent down and picked up every page carefully. Borrowing against a home without telling the homeowner isn't handling life. It's hiding. Silence filled the room. I checked my watch. My daughter would be home soon. The son-in-law wouldn't. The drive to my daughter's place felt longer than usual. The house looked perfect from the outside. Fresh paint, manicured lawn, new driveway. A home built on borrowed confidence. My daughter opened the door before I knocked. Phone pressed her ear. "I'll call back," my daughter said quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The living room told the real story. Expensive electronics. New furniture. Bills tucked behind decor, like secrets pretending to be decorations. "We need to talk," I said. Coffee was made. Avoidance disguised as hospitality. I laid the documents out on the kitchen island. The color drained from my daughter's face. "This isn't real," my daughter said. "These are fake. They came from the bank." I replied, "From lenders. From credit agencies." My daughter swept the papers aside. "You hate my husband. You're trying to ruin my marriage. I'm trying to save your home." Tears came fast now. "Get out." The word didn't sound like anger. It sounded like fear dressed up as certainty. "Look at the numbers," I said softly. I said, "Get out." My daughter repeated, lifting the phone. "I will call the police." That was the moment everything changed. Not because of the threat, but because of the certainty in my daughter's voice. The certainty that I was a problem. The certainty that facts no longer mattered. I smiled. The expression confused my daughter. That confusion hurt more than the threat. I gathered the papers neatly. "I hope the house is worth it," I said. The door closed behind me with a sound that felt permanent. I sat in my car for a long moment, staring at the front window where my daughter stood, phone still in hand. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had saved years ago, but never expected to use. A real estate attorney answered. "I need to understand my legal position," I said, "as a co-signer." The pause on the other end told me everything. "You have more power than you think," the attorney replied. I started the engine and drove away, already knowing this was no longer about family arguments. It was about foundations, and whether the one holding that house together could survive what was coming next. The attorney's office sat in a low concrete building tucked between a pharmacy and a tax service, the kind of place people visited only when something had already gone wrong. I arrived early, folder clutched tight, the same way I used to carry blueprints when a foundation inspection was about to fail. The attorney didn't waste time with small talk. The attorney flipped through the documents slowly, eyes narrowing at familiar phrases buried in fine print. Co-signer, the attorney said. Joint and several liability. Those words landed heavier than anything my daughter had said. What does that mean for me? I asked. It means the house isn't just your daughter's, the attorney replied. It means decisions tied to that property legally involve you. Refinancing, additional loans, risk exposure, and the gambling debts. The attorney slid one page forward. Those are tied directly to the property. Whoever approved those loans assumed the co-signer either consented or would absorb the loss. The room felt smaller. My daughter doesn't know, I said. The attorney met my eyes. Legally, knowledge isn't required for liability. Authority is. I leaned back slowly, letting the weight settle. This wasn't just family trouble. This was structural failure. If the payments stop, I asked. The lender comes after every name on the mortgage. The attorney said evenly, including yours. The image flashed instantly. 30 years of careful planning wiped out because someone else couldn't stop chasing winds that never came. What options exist? I asked. The attorney folded hands together. You can absorb the risk. You can force transparency. Or you can initiate protective action. Protective action? Sale. Partition. Legal separation of interests. The word sale echoed longer than expected. I drove home in silence, radio off, thoughts sharp. The neighborhood I returned to looked unchanged. Same lawns, same mailboxes, same quiet pride of people who paid bills on time and slept without secrets. Inside my house, everything sat exactly where I'd left it. Order, predictability, proof that responsibility worked. I poured coffee I didn't drink and sat at the table where my daughter once learned to balance a checkbook. Numbers had always mattered here. Consequences, too. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the house sounded like warning. Every memory felt compromised. Morning arrived gray. I called my daughter. The call went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. Instead, I drove past my daughter's house again. Not confront, just to observe. A new delivery truck sat in the driveway. Furniture, expensive. Another purchase layered over borrowed money. The house looked beautiful. Too beautiful. Like a showroom stage to distract from rot beneath the floorboards. I parked down the street and waited. My daughter left for work just after 8. Eyes down, movements rushed. No glance toward the street. No sign of yesterday's threat lingering. The son-in-law left an hour later. Sunglasses on, phone pressed to an ear, laughter floating briefly before the car door slammed. That laughter decided something inside me. I returned home and opened the filing cabinet. The folder labeled with my daughter's address was thicker than I remembered. Years of paperwork, mortgage agreements, amendments, refinancing notices, everything documented. Buried halfway through sat the clause the attorney had referenced. Joint and several liability. Not symbolic. Not emotional. Legal. I ran a finger across my signature. Written years earlier with trust instead of caution. The phone rang. My daughter's name flashed on the screen. I answered. What do you want? My daughter asked immediately, voice defensive. I want honesty. I replied. You accuse my husband of terrible things. My daughter said. You embarrassed us. I brought documents. I said. You refused to read them. Because they were lies. Then why threaten police? I asked quietly. Silence. You don't trust me, my daughter finally said. I don't trust secrecy tied to my credit. I replied. My daughter exhaled sharply. You don't understand marriage. I understand contracts, I said. And I understand risk. You're overreacting. I'm exposed, I replied. legally and financially. My daughter scoffed. You're trying to control us. I'm trying to prevent foreclosure. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, pulse steady, not angry, focused. That afternoon, the bank called again. Another inquiry. Another line of credit application. Another attempt to leverage the house. Denied, but logged. The clerk hesitated before speaking. Sir, the frequency of these attempts is concerning. So am I replied. By evening, the decision was no longer forming. It was formed. I called the attorney back. I want to proceed, I said. With which option? The attorney asked. Protection, I replied, before everything collapses. Paperwork moved quickly after that. Legal notices prepared. Financial holds initiated. Documentation requests issued. Not punishment. Containment. The next call came from the son-in-law. Anger came first. Loud. Accusatory. You went behind our backs. The son-in-law shouted. I went through legal channels. I replied, you're ruining our lives. I'm preventing mine from being destroyed. You think you're smarter than us? I think contracts don't care about feelings, I said. The line disconnected. That night, headlights flashed across my living room window. A car slowed, paused, moved on. I didn't look outside. Fear only works when invited. The following week unfolded like controlled demolition. Not loud, not dramatic, methodical. Credit lines frozen. Lenders notified. Documentation requested. My daughter showed up unannounced 3 days later. Tears first. Accusation second. You're destroying my marriage. My daughter cried. I'm exposing it. I replied, you never liked my husband. I like stability. You always think you know best. I know what default looks like. My daughter slammed a hand on the table. You want us homeless? I want the truth acknowledged, I replied. And if that costs us a house? I looked at my daughter for a long moment. The house was already being lost, I said. You just didn't know it yet. The silence that followed felt different. Cracked, uncertain, not defiant. My daughter left without another word. That night, I sat alone and reviewed the final document the attorney had sent. Initiation of forced sale proceedings. Not yet filed. Still a choice. I closed the folder and turned off the light. Tomorrow would decide whether my daughter faced reality, or whether reality would arrive without warning. Morning came with the kind of silence that only appears when something heavy is waiting to happen. I sat at the kitchen table long, before sunrise. Paper spread out, coffee untouched. The legal folder rested in front of me like a sealed door. One signature would change everything. Not emotionally. Legally, I didn't sign it yet. Instead, I drove. The route to my daughter's neighborhood felt familiar and foreign at the same time. I'd driven it hundreds of times over the years. Birthday parties, holidays, late-night repairs, rushed visits when something broke, and my presence was still welcomed. That welcome had expired. I parked a block away and watched the house wake up. Lights flicked on one by one. Curtains shifted. The garage door opened. The son-in-law stepped out first, dressed too sharply for the hour. Phone already at an ear. The body language told a story without words. Fast pacing. Tight jaw. Hands moving too much. Someone juggling more than could be controlled. A few minutes later, my daughter followed. Coffee mug in hand. Shoulders tight. Eyes tired. The house looked solid. Brick facade. Fresh paint. Carefully landscaped yard. A picture of stability that existed only because no one had bothered to check what was holding it up. I drove away before either noticed the car. Back home, the phone rang. The bank again. This time, the voice was different. More formal. Sir, due to the number of recent credit inquiries tied to property, the account has been flagged for review. What does that mean? I asked. It means any further borrowing attempts will require all responsible parties present, the representative replied. Including you. Good. I hung up and felt something close to relief. Not satisfaction. Control. By noon, the son-in-law called again. This time, the tone had shifted. Less shouting. More calculation. We need to talk, the son-in-law said. We already have, I replied. No, we haven't, the son-in-law insisted. You've misunderstood some things. Documents don't misunderstand, I said. A pause. We can handle this privately, the son-in-law said. No lawyers. No banks. That option passed when threats replaced facts. I replied. You're making a mistake, the son-in-law said quietly. This will blow back on you. I've lived long enough to recognize bluff. I replied. The line went silent. That afternoon, my daughter arrived again, this time without tears. Arms crossed, expression hard. You filed something, my daughter said. I initiated review, I replied. You went behind our backs. I went in front of creditors, I replied. You don't care about my marriage, my daughter said. I care about your future, I replied. My future is with my husband. Then your husband should stop borrowing against it. I replied. My daughter flinched at that. You don't know everything, my daughter said. I know enough, I replied. My daughter leaned forward. You think forcing a sale will teach us a lesson? I think it will stop the bleeding, I said. Silence stretched. You'd really sell our home? My daughter asked. Our home was collateral long before today. I replied. The word ours landed heavier than expected. My daughter stood abruptly. You're cruel. I'm precise, I replied. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. I sat back down and finally signed the document. The pen moved smoothly. No shaking, no hesitation. Once signed, the process no longer belonged to emotion. It belonged to law. The attorney confirmed receipt within the hour. The petition will be filed tomorrow morning, the attorney said. Once filed, it can't be undone without court approval. I understand, I replied. That night, the phone didn't stop ringing. Calls went unanswered. Voicemails piled up. My daughter's voice, angry, then pleading. The son-in-law's voice, threatening, then defensive. Friends, relatives, people who suddenly remembered my number. I listened to none of it. By morning, the filing was complete. The house was officially listed as a disputed asset. Not sold yet, but no longer untouchable. The first notice arrived by certified mail 2 days later. The son-in-law reacted immediately. A visit, unannounced, aggressive knocking. I didn't open the door. The shouting echoed through the hallway. You can't do this, the son-in-law yelled. You think you own everything. You think age gives authority. I waited. Eventually, footsteps retreated. A neighbor called later, concerned. I saw someone yelling at your door, the neighbor said. Everything is under control. I replied. That was true. Control had shifted. Within a week, the court assigned an evaluator. The house would be inspected, photographed, valued. The process moved faster than my daughter expected. Reality usually does. My daughter called again. This time, the voice was smaller. They're coming to assess the house, my daughter said. Yes, I replied. They're talking about listing it. Yes, I replied. We can't afford to move, my daughter whispered. You couldn't afford to stay, I replied. Silence. You're choosing money over family, my daughter said. I'm choosing truth over denial, I replied. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because the situation was resolved, but because it was honest. The next day, the evaluator arrived at my daughter's house. Neighbors watched. Questions circulated. Speculation spread. The son-in-law's confidence cracked publicly. That mattered more than anger ever could. The phone rang again. Unknown number. This is the evaluator. The voice said, I need to confirm some details with a co-signer. I answered every question. Calmly, factually, without apology. When the call ended, the house my daughter believed was untouchable had a number attached to it. A value, a deadline, a reality. That evening, my daughter texted one sentence. You didn't have to go this far. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. It was already this far. I typed, I just acknowledged it. The response didn't come. But something else did. A notification. Listing preparation scheduled. Photos to be taken. Potential buyers already inquiring. The house that once symbolized security had become an asset under scrutiny. And for the first time since this began, my daughter and the son-in-law were no longer driving the story. The system was. The sign went up on a Tuesday morning. I didn't see it in person at first. A neighbor sent a photo. White background. Clean lettering. The kind of sign meant to look neutral, professional, almost polite. Nothing about it suggested the damage it would cause. For my daughter, that sign wasn't ink and plastic. It was exposure. Within hours, messages started arriving. Not from my daughter. Not from the son-in-law. From people who had never questioned anything before. Extended family members. Old friends. Even a former co-worker who had attended my daughter's wedding and once praised what a solid future that young couple had. Questions came wrapped in concern. Is everything okay? Are you really selling the house? Did something happen between you and your daughter? I answered none of them. The truth didn't need defending. It only needed time. By afternoon, my daughter called. The voice sounded tight, rehearsed, like someone reading lines from a script that kept changing. The realtor came, my daughter said, took pictures, measured rooms, asked about upgrades. That's standard, I replied. You didn't tell me it would move this fast. The bank didn't tell me about the debt, I replied. A sharp inhale came through the phone. Neighbors are asking questions, my daughter said. Creditors don't ask politely, I replied. Silence followed. Can you stop this? My daughter finally asked. I can't, I replied. Not without putting myself back at risk. That's not fair. Neither is borrowing against a co-signed home without consent. The line went dead. That evening, the son-in-law arrived again. This time, the visit was quieter. No shouting. No pounding. A knock. Firm. Controlled. I opened the door, but didn't invite the son-in-law inside. The son-in-law stood on the porch, jaw clenched, hands tight at the sides. You're enjoying this, the son-in-law said. I'm stabilizing damage, I replied. You humiliated us. Debt does that, I replied. The son-in-law stepped closer. You could have handled this privately. I tried, I replied. I was threatened with police. That was emotional, the son-in-law snapped. So is foreclosure, I replied. The son-in-law laughed bitterly. You think this ends well? I think it ends, I replied. A pause followed. Wind moved through the trees. Somewhere down the block, a lawn mower started. What do you want? The son-in-law asked. I want transparency, I replied. I want liability removed. I want the bleeding to stop. And if that costs the house? Then the house was the price of deception, I replied. The son-in-law shook the head slowly. You're destroying your relationship with your daughter. That relationship was already damaged, I replied. I'm just no longer pretending. The son-in-law stared for a long moment, then turned away without another word. That night, a new email arrived. Offer pending review. A buyer already interested. The market was moving faster than expected. The next day, the evaluator's report came through. The house was valued higher than anticipated. Equity existed, but so did the debt stacked against it. The numbers were unforgiving. Once everything was subtracted, mortgage balance, secondary liens, fees, the remaining amount shrank fast. I forwarded the report to the attorney. The reply came quickly. This confirms necessity, the attorney wrote. Proceeding protects your credit and limits exposure. That word, necessity, brought unexpected calm, not justification, validation. By the end of the week, the house officially entered active listing. Showings scheduled. Buyers booked. The son-in-law lost control of the narrative. Neighbors watched strangers walk to the living room where holiday dinners had once been staged for social media photos. My daughter called again. This time, the anger was gone. What happens after the sale? My daughter asked quietly. The debt is cleared, I replied. Liability ends. And us? My daughter asked. That depends on choices made after reality. I replied. A long pause. You never taught me how to deal with loss, my daughter said. I taught responsibility. I replied, loss comes when responsibility is ignored. Tears broke through. I didn't know it was this bad, my daughter whispered. I tried to show you, I replied. The call ended without goodbye. That night, a moving truck appeared in my daughter's driveway. Not packing, staging. The realtor preparing for open house. The house was no longer a home. It was inventory. The first official offer arrived 2 days later. Strong, clean, cash-backed. The attorney called immediately. This will move to court approval, the attorney said. Once accepted, the timeline accelerates. Proceed, I replied. My daughter found out that evening. A text message appeared. You already accepted an offer? I approve consideration, I replied. You didn't wait for us. The system doesn't wait, I replied. You always do this, my daughter typed. You decide. Everyone else reacts. I reacted for years. I replied, this is the first decision made without asking permission. The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, appeared again, then nothing. 3 days later, the son-in-law was served official papers. That moment changed everything. The bravado vanished. The threat stopped. Law replaced emotion. A meeting was requested through attorneys. Not family. Professionals. I agreed. The conference room felt sterile. My daughter sat rigid. The son-in-law looked smaller. The attorney spoke calmly, outlining consequences. The sale proceeds, the attorney said. Debt clears. Remaining funds split according to agreement. What if we contest? The son-in-law asked. You lose time and money, the attorney replied, and risk additional penalties. My daughter finally looked at me. You really won't stop, my daughter said. I really can't, I replied. The meeting ended without resolution, but the direction was clear. The house would be sold. The illusion of control was gone, and the only question left wasn't about money. It was about what would survive once everything else was stripped away. The days after meeting felt unnaturally calm, the kind of calm that settles right before something irreversible finishes taking shape. The paperwork moved forward without emotion. Court notices arrived on schedule. The listing stayed active. Showings continued. My daughter stopped calling. That silence carried more weight than the arguments ever had. I woke early each morning and walked the neighborhood, letting routine steady the mind. Familiar houses lined the street, each one representing choices made years ago, some careful, some careless. The difference between them was never luck. It was patience. At midweek, the realtor called. We're receiving multiple inquiries, the realtor said. Your approval will be needed to select the final offer for court submission. How soon? I asked. Within 48 hours, the realtor replied. The process was tightening. That afternoon, my daughter appeared again, unannounced, standing on the porch with arms folded tight across the chest. The face looked older than it had a month ago, like denial had finally given way to exhaustion. I just want to understand, my daughter said after stepping inside. I want to understand why this went so far. I didn't rush to answer. Because the house was no longer safe, I replied. Because the risk wasn't hypothetical. Because my name was tied to choices I didn't make. You could have trusted us, my daughter said. I trusted for years, I replied. Trust without verification becomes liability. My daughter sank into the chair opposite the table. The debt started small, my daughter admitted. A few bets, a few wins, then losses, then chasing losses. I listened without interrupting. The husband kept saying the next one would fix everything. My daughter continued, that the system would work if patience held. That's not a system, I replied. That's hope pretending to be strategy. Tears slipped free then, quiet and uncontrolled. I didn't want to believe it, my daughter said. I didn't want to see it. I know, I replied. That's why this had to happen. Anger flickered briefly. So, this is punishment? This is consequence, I replied. Punishment requires intent to hurt. Consequence follows action. The silence that followed felt different from previous silences. Less hostile, more resigned. What happens to us now? My daughter asked. That depends on choices made after today. I replied. The question lingered between us, unanswered. 2 days later, the selected offer moved to court approval. The number was strong, clean, enough to clear debts and end liability. The son-in-law reacted predictably. Anger returned briefly, then bargaining, then panic. A message arrived late one night. Please talk. Everything can change. Counseling, treatment, repayment. I forwarded the message to the attorney without response. Words had reached expiration. The court date arrived quietly. No drama, no speeches, just confirmation. The judge approved the sale. The gavel sound was soft, almost polite, but the meaning was final. The house would change hands within weeks. My daughter learned the decision through official notice. The call came that evening. It's really happening, my daughter said. Yes, I replied. We have to move, my daughter said. Yes, I replied. A pause. I don't know where to go, my daughter admitted. I hope you choose stability, I replied. The call ended there. Over the next days, the house emptied. Furniture disappeared. Decorations vanished. The curated image dissolved into bare walls and echoing rooms. The neighborhood watched quietly. Judgment didn't come from whispers. It came from absence. On moving day, I drove past once. The driveway stood empty. The place where birthdays had been celebrated, where laughter had once sounded real, now looked like any other property between owners. That sight hurt, but not the way I expected. It hurt because it confirmed something I had avoided admitting for years. The house had never been the problem. The foundation beneath the relationship had been cracked long before the debts surfaced. A final call came from my daughter a week later. We found an apartment, my daughter said. Small, temporary. That's a start, I replied. The husband is leaving town, my daughter added. Job transfer. I absorbed the information quietly. And you? I asked. I'm staying, my daughter said. Working, figuring things out. Good, I replied. Another pause. I don't know what our relationship looks like now, my daughter said. I don't either, I replied. But clarity is a better place to rebuild from an illusion. The call ended gently. No shouting, no accusations, just exhaustion and truth. The closing date arrived. The funds transferred. Liability ended. My name cleared. The attorney confirmed everything was complete. For the first time in months, the phone stayed quiet. No banks, no threats, no emergencies manufactured to regain control. Just silence. I sat at the kitchen table again, coffee finally warm, and realized something important. The action taken wasn't about taking something away. It was about stopping something from being taken further. The house was gone, but so was the leverage. And for the first time in a long time, the future wasn't being negotiated under pressure. It was open, uncertain, and finally honest. The quiet after the closing felt unnatural, like the silence that follows machinery being shut down after running non-stop for months. No calls from lenders. No emails marked urgent. No voices demanding explanations. Just space. For the first few days, that space felt unfamiliar. My body still expected interruption. The phone sat within reach, even when there was no reason for it to ring. Old habits die slowly, especially the habit of being needed. I reorganized the house. Not because anything was out of place, but because order had always helped me think. Files were sorted again, though nothing new needed filing. The folder with my daughter's address was moved from active to closed, slid to the back of the cabinet like a chapter already finished. The attorney called midweek with final confirmation. Everything is settled. No remaining exposure. Credit impact fully contained. Thank you, I replied. You did the right thing, the attorney added, voice measured. Many people don't. I didn't do the easy thing, I replied. That's usually the same thing, the attorney said. After the call ended, I sat longer than necessary, staring at the wall where family photos used to hang. Some were still there, but a few had been taken down during the worst weeks. Not out of anger. out of clarity. I wasn't sure where those memories belonged yet. The first message from my daughter came 3 days later. Not a call, not an accusation. A simple text. We're moved. Safe. I read it twice before responding. Good. I typed, take care of yourself. No heart emoji. No reassurance. Just respect. That restraint felt strange but right. Another week passed. The world didn't end. Bills were paid. Groceries bought. Days moved forward. Stability returned in small, quiet ways. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped me while I was checking the mail. I heard about your daughter's house, the neighbor said gently. That must have been hard. It was necessary, I replied. The neighbor nodded, understanding more than words could say. People who paid attention usually did. That evening, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end sounded tired. Dad, my daughter said. I didn't interrupt. I'm calling because I'm starting to see things differently, my daughter continued. Not all at once, just slowly. I waited. The apartment is small, my daughter said. Everything feels temporary, but quieter. No constant tension. That matters, I replied. The husband is gone, my daughter added. The job transfer turned into something more permanent. I absorbed the information without reaction. I don't know what happens next, my daughter said. I just know I don't want to repeat what happened. That awareness is where change starts, I replied. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Reflective. I'm not asking for anything, my daughter said quickly. I just wanted you to know. I appreciate that, I replied. When the call ended, I realized something important. This was the first conversation that didn't involve defense. No one was trying to win. Time passed differently after that. Weeks turned into months. The urgency that once ruled everything dissolved into routine. Morning walks, evening meals, projects that had been postponed because chaos always demanded priority. I repainted the spare room, fixed the loose step on the back porch, donated items that no longer fit the life I was living now. The money from the sale sat untouched, not because it wasn't needed, but because it didn't feel urgent anymore. Control had returned. One morning, I opened the filing cabinet again, not to relive anything, but to reassess. The trust documents sat exactly where they'd always been. Unchanged. Stable. I reread them carefully, not looking for loopholes, but for intent. The purpose had always been protection, not provision. That distinction mattered more now. I made one small adjustment. Not to amounts, not to structure. I added conditions. Not punishment, guidance, education support, counseling support, emergency support, no unrestricted access, no assumptions. The lawyer approved the update without hesitation. You're thinking long-term, the lawyer said. I always was, I replied. I just confused generosity with safety. Late one evening, my daughter sent another message. I started therapy, my daughter wrote. I needed help understanding why I ignored so much. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. I'm proud of that choice, I replied. The response came almost immediately. Thank you, my daughter wrote. That word carried more weight than apologies ever could. Another call came weeks later. This time, the voice sounded steadier. I got a promotion, my daughter said. Nothing huge, but stable. That's earned progress, I replied. I didn't ask for help, my daughter added. I wanted you to know that too. I smiled without realizing it. That was the real shift. Not the sale, not the documents, not the money. Responsibility had returned to the right place. The past didn't disappear. It settled. One afternoon, while cleaning out the garage, I found an old toolbox my daughter used as a child. Stickers still clung to the sides. Crayons inside instead of tools. I held it for a long moment before placing it back on the shelf. Some things didn't need to be thrown away. They just needed context. That night, as I locked the house and turned off the lights, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace without vigilance. No waiting for the next crisis. No preparing for impact. just space. And in that space, I understood something I'd missed for years. Saving someone from consequences doesn't save them. Letting consequences arrive, and standing firm when they do, sometimes does. The quiet didn't disappear after that sense of peace arrived. It deepened. Morning stopped feeling like something survived. Coffee tasted like coffee again instead of distraction. The house no longer echoed with unresolved conversations. Every room felt honest, even the ones that still held memories I hadn't fully unpacked. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. Not a bill, not legal paperwork. An envelope with careful handwriting. My daughter's handwriting. I didn't open it immediately. I set it on the kitchen table and finished what I was doing first, a habit built over decades of discipline. Urgent things that aren't truly urgent can wait. This felt important but not explosive. When I finally opened the letter, the paper inside was folded neatly, the way my daughter used to fold school assignments when presentations still mattered. The letter didn't start with an apology. It started with ownership. I didn't listen when you tried to protect me. I thought love meant agreeing with everything. I see now that love sometimes sounds like warning. I paused there longer than anywhere else. The letter continued, explaining, not justifying. How denial had felt easier than confrontation. How the marriage had been defended not because it was healthy, but because admitting the truth would have required action. Action my daughter wasn't ready for then. I blamed you because it was safer than facing what I married into, the letter said. When you walked away, I thought you were abandoning me. Now I see you were refusing to enable destruction. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, not because I was done reading, because I needed to breathe. That night, sleep came easily, not because everything was fixed, because everything was honest. The next week, my daughter asked to meet, not at the house, not somewhere emotional, a quiet cafe halfway between neighborhoods. I arrived early, chose a table near the window, back to the wall. Old habits. Awareness never fully leaves. When my daughter walked in, the difference was visible immediately, not in clothes or posture, but in presence. No rehearsed defensiveness, no scanning for exits. Over dinner, conversation drifted to the future. Career changes. Long-term goals. Ownership feels different now. My daughter said, I don't want something just because it looks stable. I want it because I can maintain it. That's the difference between possession and stewardship. I replied, we washed dishes together. Ordinary. Peaceful. Before leaving, my daughter handed me a folder. Inside was a simple document. Not a request. Not an obligation. A written acknowledgement. Repayment plan. Not demanded. Not expected. Chosen. I don't want to owe, my daughter said. I want to contribute. Emotions surfaced, but stayed contained. That matters more than the money, I replied. Driving home, the sky darkened early. Streetlights flickered on. I realized something unexpected. I wasn't proud because my daughter had struggled. I was proud because responsibility had replaced denial. That winter, I downsized. Not forced. Intentional. A smaller place near the park. Fewer rooms. More light. Each object brought along had meaning. Everything else was released. Minimalism wasn't aesthetic. It was clarity. The final boxes contained only documents and photographs. In one photo, a younger version of my daughter sat beside a math worksheet, brow furrowed. I smiled. Learning never stops. On New Year's Day, I wrote a short list. Not resolutions. Principles. Help without erasing accountability. Speak truth without urgency. Let consequences teach what words cannot. The year unfolded quietly. No emergencies. No threats. Just progress. Occasionally, memories surfaced, standing in that doorway, hearing the words go away. Those words no longer hurt. They marked the moment everything changed. Not because of anger, because clarity arrived. The house that was almost lost taught a lesson larger than property. It taught boundaries. It taught self-respect. It taught that love doesn't mean shielding someone from consequences. It means trusting someone enough to face them. And most importantly, it taught that walking away can sometimes be the most protective act of all. The year ended without ceremony. No dramatic closure. No final confrontation. Just quiet alignment settling into place. The way structures do after a storm passes, and the foundation proves solid. Life narrowed into what mattered. Mornings began early. Walks through the park replaced restless pacing. Coffee became ritual instead of fuel. Time slowed in a way that felt earned. One afternoon, my daughter visited with no agenda, no documents, no difficult topics waiting behind polite conversation. Just presence. We sat on the porch as the sun dipped lower, light stretching across the yard. I used to think strength meant enduring, my daughter said. Now I know it means choosing differently. That realization changes everything, I replied. I wish I had listened sooner, my daughter added. Learning late is still learning, I said. Many never learn at all. Silence followed. Comfortable, honest. A few weeks later, a letter arrived from a financial institution, confirming final closure of all past obligations. No outstanding liabilities. No shared risk. No unresolved ties. I filed it without ceremony. Some victories don't need applause. The volunteer classes expanded. Attendance grew. Faces changed. Stories repeated in different forms. I co-signed because I loved, someone said. I stayed quiet to keep peace, another said. I paid to avoid conflict, a third admitted. I recognized every version. I shared one sentence in every session. Support without boundaries becomes permission. That sentence lingered longer than any lecture. Spring returned again. Trees bloomed where branches had looked dead months earlier. Cycles completed themselves whether anyone watched or not. One morning, my daughter called early. I bought a small place, my daughter said. Nothing flashy. Affordable. Sustainable. Congratulations, I replied. I qualified alone, my daughter added quietly. That detail mattered more than any square footage. I wanted you to hear it from me first. Thank you, I said. That means something. Moving day arrived without drama. No borrowed money. No expectations. I helped carry boxes. Light ones only. During a break, my daughter handed me a set of keys. Not as leverage, my daughter said. As trust. I accepted. Trust earned differently feels different in the hand. Later that night, alone again, I reflected on the long arc of everything that had happened. The confrontation, the refusal, the legal clarity, the distance, the rebuilding. Every step had been necessary, even the painful ones, especially the painful ones. I realized something then that I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Relief, not relief that conflict had ended. Relief that self-betrayal had ended. For years, generosity had been used to cover fear. Fear of being unnecessary. Fear of being left behind. Fear of being unloved if boundaries appeared. That fear no longer had authority. One afternoon, sorting old paperwork, I found the original letter from the bank. The first document that started everything. I read it once more, then shredded it. Some things don't deserve archival space. That summer, a small celebration took place. Not a reunion. Not a reconciliation ceremony. Just a shared meal. My daughter cooked. I brought dessert. Conversation flowed without tiptoeing. No one pretended the past hadn't happened. No one lived inside it. At one point, my daughter paused. I used to think you walking away meant abandonment, my daughter said. Now I understand it meant refusing to lie to both of us. That distinction matters, I replied. It does, my daughter said. When evening came, the light stayed on longer than necessary. Not because anyone wanted to avoid goodbyes, but because being together no longer felt costly. Driving home, windows down, air warm, I thought about how easily everything could have gone differently. How enabling could have continued. How resentment could have grown. How silence could have calcified into permanent distance. None of that happened because one moment broke the pattern. Standing at a doorway, hearing the words, "Go away," choosing not to argue, choosing not to beg, choosing not to rescue, choosing to act with precision instead of emotion. That choice didn't destroy the family. It revealed it. Months later, my daughter sent a message. A photo of a small plant on a windowsill. Caption, "First thing I paid for the new place." I replied with a simple message. Care grows where responsibility lives. The message was read. No reply followed. None was needed. As the year closed again, I updated the will. Not as punishment, as clarity. Each provision reflected current reality. Independence honored. Support conditional on accountability, not control. Structure. That night, sleep came easily. Not because everything was perfect, because everything was aligned. Looking back, I understood something that took decades to learn. Love that erases consequences teaches dependence. Love that respects boundaries teaches strength. I had finally learned the difference. And so had my daughter. The house that almost collapsed became the lesson that rebuilt everything. Not through force, through truth. And that truth held. If my story made you pause, reflect, or see family situations differently, take a moment to support the channel. Subscribe, share where you're watching from the comments, and help this story reach others who might need to hear it today.